Well, welcome everyone. My name is Vaughan Rees and I'm part of the chaplaincy team at USW. Today's event is part of the chaplaincy's contribution to mark Black History Month. I am delighted to welcome the Revd Professor Teddy Kalongo to be our guest, and I'm going to introduce Teddy in just a moment. But before I do so, and Teddy will be used to this because he's a minister in the church, there are going to be a couple of notices. So first of all, I just want to say to you that Kay Dennis, the welfare officer at the Student Union, will be live later on this afternoon at 4 o'clock with Cook with Kay. Now, I understand this is taken off in a big way, lots of followers, lots of interest. So Kay this afternoon will be sharing recipes and discussing attendees' attempts at her recipe of the week. And she'll also be talking about Black History Month. So if you want to know more about that, just have a look at the SU website, but do go along and join in. And also, the Students' Union will be hosting Lewis Gray, course leader for BA Music Business, whose research background is in race and education. And Lewis will be sharing his perspective on being Black in the creative industry in the UK and celebrating the success of Black creatives. And everybody is welcome to join in with that. And that's going to be on Thursday, the 22nd of this month. So if you look out for it, the details will be on Connect and, of course, on the SU website. So please, again, come and join in those events. I should say to you at this stage, just for your information, that today's event is being recorded. And also, the other thing I'd like to say is I'd like to say a big thank you to Laura Ferguson, who has worked so hard behind the scenes to make this event possible and who is invisibly making sure it runs smoothly now. So Laura, thank you very much for all your hard work. So the format for our time together now is that we're going to listen to Teddy in a few moments. Teddy's going to talk to us for about 30 minutes or so. Then there's going to be an opportunity for questions. So please can I remind you to put your questions in the usual way, and then I'll be able to ask them to Teddy at the end. We'd encourage you to ask any question that you feel is appropriate, and I'm sure that Teddy will do his very best to address them. And then after that, Claire Payton-Stagg, our Equalities Manager, will round off this event for us. And I suppose in a seamless link into talking about Claire, I should say Claire is going to be leaving us in the middle of November as she moves on to new and exciting job. Those of you who know Claire and who have experienced working with her as a colleague will know what a great loss that's going to be to us. Such is the measure, I think, of Claire's commitment, her passion, her wisdom and professionalism. It's not surprising that she's been snapped up to work her magic elsewhere. Claire, I just wanted to take this opportunity to say to you, we at the chaplaincy are so grateful for your partnership on the journey. We have learned so much from you and benefited so much from your support. We have genuinely admired your strong but gentle commitment to fighting for the equality for others. You have been patient and graceful to us when we've not been at our best. You've bigged us up when we've not deserved it. And you've always encouraged us throughout it all. I think your thorough decency and courtesy, even when there has been many reasons to be otherwise, gives us all something to live up to. So Claire, on behalf of us all at the chaplaincy, I want to say thank you, good luck, and Godspeed in your new future. So now down to the work of the day. Let me introduce to you our guest. The Revd Professor Teddy Kalongo was born in Kitwe in Zambia. He's an ordained minister. And before coming to Britain, Teddy taught biblical studies at the University Church of Zambia University in Kitwe, rising to the position there of academic dean and eventually becoming principal of the university. In 2004, he was appointed to serve as the General Secretary of the United Church of Zambia, a position he held before moving to Britain in 2007 after a stop-off in South Africa. Teddy pursued his theological studies at the United Church of Zambia and then in the University of Zimbabwe in Harare. And then he went to Cape Town University in Cape Town, South Africa. Since coming to the UK, Teddy has served as a minister superintendent, as a Methodist, previously in Penarth, and currently serving in the Bridgend United area since September 2015, where he has pastoral oversight for Trinity Church in Porthcawl and Bethel Church in Gilfachgoch. Teddy is also a volunteer chaplain to South Wales Police Services based at the police headquarters in Bridgend. Teddy is married to Amelia and God has blessed them with 4 boys and they live in Porthcawl. I want to say, in addition to this, Teddy is a thoroughly good and lovely man who has brought much joy and blessing to us as the minister of our church in Porthcawl. Teddy, you are very welcome among us, and it's over to you now.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for inviting me today to be part of the University of South Wales Chaplain celebration of Black History Month. It is an honor for me to be here with you today. October is traditionally recognized as Black History Month. Black History Month recognizes the often ignored contributions which Black people have made throughout history within the worlds of science and politics, education and the arts, sport and community building. Black History Month reminds us to celebrate stories which have perhaps gone untold and been absent from our history of the events which have shaped society over the years. And certainly there are many causes for celebrating not only the gifts of Black people in Britain and the world today, but also to enable us look at where we are coming from while giving thanks as we look forward to the future. The history of Black people in the United Kingdom is part of the history of the entire Commonwealth and the world. But this year's celebrations of Black History Month is considered by many people in our country as different and unique event since its inception. The year 2020 has been an extraordinary year, and 2 significant events have taken place among us this year and have to a large extent shaped the framework of my presentation with you today. Firstly, the coronavirus pandemic has had a disproportionate impact on Black communities and has heightened awareness of systematic racial injustice in the United Kingdom and globally. And not only is the coronavirus continuing to wreak havoc with human lives, but now we are seeing a situation where segregation, racism, and separatist attitudes are dominating human relationships once more. In a Public Health England review on the disparities in the risk and outcomes of the coronavirus pandemic, the following is highlighted, and I quote: people from Black ethnic groups were most likely to be diagnosed. Death rates from COVID-19 were highest among people of Black and Asian ethnic groups. This is the opposite of what is seen in previous years, when the mortality rates were lower in Asian and Black ethnic groups than white ethnic groups. Therefore, the disparity in COVID-19 mortality between ethnic groups is the opposite of that seen in previous years. People who live in deprived areas have higher diagnosis rates and death rates than those living in less deprived areas. The mortality rates from COVID-19 in the most deprived areas were more than double the least deprived areas for both males and females. This is greater than the inequality seen in mortality rates in previous years, indicating greater inequality in death rates from COVID-19. End of quote. This is an extract from the executive summary published in June 2020, PHA publication Gateway. This report makes painful and sad reading. but it reflects the sad reality of the conditions of deprivation, of poverty, of disease, the lack of resources, poor housing and overcrowding that the Black people in this country live in the 21st century Britain. Secondly, the killing of George Floyd in the United States of America has cast a stark light on issues of racial injustice and stirred an upsurge in Black Lives Matter conviction amongst people of all ethnicities and ages. That's why we cannot afford to remain silent when people like George Floyd are deprived of life through callous, racist, and insensitive public order actions that are not meted out equally and without bias amongst the whole community, whether be it in the United Kingdom with the highest incidences of stop and search amongst BME youths when compared to those of white ethnic origin, or in the United States with the ongoing riots and continued segregation by police forces in dispensing their brand of justice. I'll discuss the offshoots of the coronavirus pandemic and also the killing of George Floyd to highlight issues of the lockdown, racism, and Black Lives Matter. The lockdown seems to have provided space for us to hear the many diverse voices challenging the status quo and calling for change politically, socially, religiously, and economically. Black History Month was never about limiting interest and focus on Black history to only 31 days in the year, but more than ever before today, people seem ready and determined to sit down, to listen and to hear these stories. But how should we respond to the picture unfolding around us in our country and in the world? Do Black Lives Matter in the United Kingdom? What does it mean to be white when Black Lives Matter? And what about the legacies of slavery, the issue of historical symbols, statues? What about the impacts of the transatlantic slavery on Black communities around the world, including here in the United Kingdom? What about the issues of the Mediterranean Sea and the English Channel today becoming the graveyard for refugees fleeing from war, armed conflicts, or in search of a better life? The longing for justice locally and globally, whether to address issues of poverty and hunger, social isolation, prejudice, or the possibility of global extinction, there still seems to be a human need to speak out, to campaign, to raise money and awareness, to educate, and to help. The themes we are exploring during the lockdown period are challenging and thought-provoking. I will turn to the issue of racism. We have come a long way from the days of slavery, and we live in a great country here where the rule of law is respected. But even though we have come a long way, but we still have a long way to go. The disease of racism has infected every aspect of human society, every country and every people globally. Racism has diminished entire races of people into vile stereotypes. Blacks are often seen as violent. Sometimes Native Britons are seen as drunk and lazy. Asians are seen as super intelligent, and Africans are seen as corrupt. One of the great scholars, Dennett Lear, says, racism isn't born, folks. You know what it has. You're not born into it. Our living patterns today are based upon a preference of lumping people together by their racial identity. And even in the church and other organizations, we still have these things happening. But before any organization can deal with racism in the world, it has to deal with racism within itself, within its community, and within the people themselves. How can we tell others how to integrate in society when we can't even integrate ourselves? I have been asked several times myself whether I've experienced racism personally. Yes, I have. I have experienced racism both in Africa and in the United Kingdom. Human beings tend to be tribal and racist in nature. In my own country, Zambia, we have tribal issues where people sometimes practice tribalism, segregation against other people of different tribes. And this is seen more especially during elections for political office, employment, marriage, and social relationships. On one occasion, I want to give a story to share with you. I was boarding a 21-seater plane from Lilongwe in Malawi to Mzuzu. We were standing in a queue going through security and customs. I happened to be the only Black African in this queue. Everyone else was whites, tourists going on holiday to Mzuzu. Not one of the whites who were ahead of me were stopped to be searched, but I was stopped and searched, stopped by a fellow Black person. The second story I remember about racism is when I arrived in Bridgend, my first week in work, and was preparing to take one of my first church services. One of my colleagues phoned me and told me that I should not take a service in our church because the children in that church have never seen a Black person before. And the experience of seeing one might affect them and they would stop coming to church. I was in Chicago a year or so ago for my sabbatical, and I came to listen to one of the presentations in the Women Fellowship, where they were having an interaction with the youth. And most of the women were saying to the Black children, talking about the need of conversation with young Black sons, how to behave around the police so that they don't get shot. They were telling them to be humble, whatever the police ask them. Make no sudden movements, never run. They were essentially having conversations with their Black children about how to live in a world with racism. If we are to create change in our world, we need to have the equivalent conversations with all races in our country on how to live with one another in harmony and love. A few thoughts and perspectives on Black Lives Matter. During these times, I asked myself, what does it mean to be Black in the United Kingdom? A country that collectively asserts that every human being is important, that every human has inherent worth and dignity. And yet we seem unable to bear out the truth expressed in our own communities, and let alone the world. I believe that all lives matter, but I also know that it's not compassionate to say all lives matter in the face of the pain and grief that is experienced by Black people. Black people in this country are fighting for their lives in ways that most people cannot imagine. We are proclaiming that our lives matter in the face of crushing oppression. And when Black people say our lives matter, when we say Black lives matter, the only answer that aligns with our conviction truly is yes, they do. But if we don't listen, if we can't see and can't hear what is wrong in our own community, we will stay indifferent and unaware of the Black people's experience. We will stay neutral in this situation. The retired Archbishop of Cape Town, the Reverend Desmond Tutu, once said, if you are neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor. End of quote. To remain neutral in situations of injustice is to choose the side of the oppressor. When Black people say we are experiencing oppression from the criminal justice system, the community needs to believe it. When Black people say we want the same rights as everyone else has, we as a community must say, yes, you deserve that. It's your right. But everybody must be on board because all lives have inherent worth and dignity, for all we stand for justice, equity, and compassion. And so for me, embracing the inherent worth and dignity of each person deeply means also looking to the fundamental principles of human rights, of our conviction, of justice, of equity, and of compassion. And this also can be seen in the context of the Black Lives Movement being aligned and seen in the context of violence. We have seen sad pictures on television, in London and other cities in our country where there have been violent attacks on our police officers, where we have seen angry protests. And not only you meant to defend one's rights, it defeats the concept and the cause. So the sad part is that there's never a solution to fix when you engage in violence. So the Black Lives Matter movement has moved from being a peaceful, supportive group to a more violent protest type of movement. I think we need dialogue, reconciliation, and peaceful protests and demonstrations in order to achieve our cause. Just a few reflections about my life. I began my life and ministry in Zambia. Zambia was formerly a British colony and got independence in 1964. Britain had been in the thick of its empire building in Africa, led by Cecil Rhodes, inspired by his vision of Anglo-Saxon as the first race in the world, and taking over many territories in Southern Africa, displacing many of the local population. And a large part of Southern Africa actually was named after Rhodes himself. My country was known as Northern Rhodesia, and Zimbabwe was also Southern Rhodesia. And of course, with a major new city in Salisbury, also named after a sitting British Prime Minister. And so a colony like Zambia would only been declared independent in 1964. And the business of the empire was of course profitable and looked like it would go on indefinitely until most of Africa was liberated. I myself grew up as a Black person in independent Zambia, where we were seen really only through the eyes of our colonial masters, our colonial occupiers. In school, I learned more about British culture and history than native Zambian culture and history. We were taught nothing about our lives as Zambian Africans, apart from Western values, traditions, and culture, to the extent where we were taught even to discredit and also look at our own cultures and traditions as evil. And this also moved even into the church, but the church in Zambia is quite Western. Today, colonialism and empire is being asked to account for their actions in Africa and different parts of the world. And today, the continental Africa and other nations are free, which includes Zambia. But there are so many debates and dialogues that are taking place at this time. People are challenging the dominant narratives of what took place during the colonial period. People are trying, especially as we celebrate Black Lives History Month, to acknowledge and appreciate the victims and other fallen heroes of the colonial period, and where possible to seek reparations for the damage that was inflicted on a people. And so we are seeing these narratives being challenged through the growing movements across the world to remove statues and other symbols celebrating slavery and other people involved in colonial history. In South Africa, we have seen the Rhodes Must Fall protests, which have amplified all this debate. And recently on our streets, we have seen protests in Bristol, London, Cambridge, and other areas. The US and the United Kingdom are finding it difficult and disentering white supremacy and its symbols from the body of politics. But we cannot change history. All that I might suggest we need to do is to do a rebalancing on what is shared history. We need to find out what are the important narratives and symbols and heroes of the African peoples, and to be able to see these symbols also put on the streets in the public gatherings and spaces of our country. Throughout history, Black people have always been present in the United Kingdom, but there's been a lack of representation in the history books. But it's not right for us to bring down statues, to bring down historical monuments which represent the history and the past of this country. But we can contribute to that history by identifying symbols that will bring also into those spaces the history of the Black people. Moving on, there's also, I'm conscious when Vaughan was introducing me that I'm chaplain to the police. And one of the things that I've seen in my work with the police, I have met very good people who are dedicated to their work, who are dedicated to build better communities, peaceful communities, who are dedicated to protecting our lives. And so I'm incredibly supportive of the police officers, their bravery, their work that they do to protect us, and the very risks that they face in the line of duty. And they, like me, like all of us in our culture, all of us in every community still found a few elements that can tarnish the image of a good organization. The overwhelming number of our policemen are wonderful and good people committed to their work. And so there's always this debate in our communities as to whether the police are biased against Black people or not. But that is something that we can discuss and have a conversation on. In closing, I just want to say that each one of us, with our words, our actions, our donations, our prayers, our protests, and our votes can help to stem the tides of hatred, intolerance, and individualism which have swept across the country and the world in the last few years. It is my prayer that the month of October may be a fulfilling month for all of us as we celebrate Black History Month and value and show goodness in one another. Barack Obama once said, change will not come if we wait for some other person or some other time. We are the ones we have been waiting for. We are the change that we seek. Thank you very much, and over to you, Vaughan.
We thank Teddy for sharing his thoughts and experiences with us. There is much in what Teddy has said to give us food for thought. So why not join us in part 2 for the question and answer session? It's available on the Chaplaincy YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. So whatever you prefer, please join us from there. And also don't forget, if we at the Chaplaincy can help you in any way, then just get in touch. Our details are on the screen now.